Yes, very good to see. Thank you. All right, folks. Well, thank you all for getting settled into your chairs for this next session. It will be standing room only, whether you want to sit or stand. It's your choice. Hi, everybody. My name is Alyssa Miller, and I am the moderator of this next session. We have a panel discussion. We're going to get underway in just a moment here. Beyond the inflection point, what does the data center interconnect landscape look like? And so I'll read you the description as we get settled in here. According to Equinix, global interconnection bandwidth is forecast for 40% CAGR over the next 5 years. Development dollars are pouring into secondary markets, edge markets from all parts of the ecosystem, and cloud services are moving closer to the end user, precipitating a transformation. In this session, we will be exploring what the key drivers of new data center interconnect deployments are, the challenges when upgrading to 800 gigs, and how the now prevailing east-west traffic flow is impacting network topology. We have a fantastic set of panelists here. I am going to ask each of them to introduce themselves so that they can help establish their point of view with you as we jump into our questions. So starting up here, we've got Andrew.
Hiya, so I'm Andy Haynes, and I work for EXA Networks, running product and technology.
I'm Sherry Harrell at Flexential, so I lead our product management group, focused on making sure we got the right products for today and for tomorrow for our customers.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Jonathan Martone. I'm with Neutrality Data Centers, and I run interconnection and network solutions.
Hello, Jerry Colacino. I'm with Precision Optical Transceivers, and I run the Solutions Engineering Group, focused on the physical layer interconnection.
I'm Brad Ramo. I am with StackPath, and I am responsible for everything that touches or leaves our network, including space and power.
All right, so for the sake of background noise and making sure you can hear us all correctly, I'm just going to ask everyone to make sure you bring your mics closer to your mouth and you speak loud and clearly. We are going to be talking about data center interconnection. It is key. Enabling interconnection between disparate data center locations, service providers, and operators, it continues to be of growing concern. What are the key drivers of new data center interconnect deployments? And we'll start with you, Andrew.
Sure, so this is a topic I can talk about for a long time, so I'll get nudged in a minute. But I think for me, personally, I love data in terms of the way that you run networks, businesses, to be able to analyze and understand what your customers are doing, what your environment is doing. And when I think about the forward landscape and what's really happening in the fourth industrial revolution, right, it's all about the more data points we can connect together, just like the network effect and more nodes on a computer network makes that network more powerful. More data connected makes the insights more powerful. So the more we can connect together, the more we can understand. And I just see absolutely no business problem out in the wider economy that doesn't involve executives saying, I need to know more, I need to sense more, I need to analyze more, right? So the more you need to do that sensing, that analysis, collecting data out of a multitude of different sources and being able to cut it in 1,000 different ways, the more you're going to need all of this connectivity, all of this data center infrastructure. And that's before you even factor in things like the machine learning with its voracious appetite for incremental data points. So I really see no slowdown in the underlying demand.
So I'd second that on the connectivity piece. I really see it as there's two primary factors for where to deploy your data center interconnection. One being the data center inventory, the space and power availability. The other being the access to partners, customers, and vendors that you need to build your solution. So that access could be right next to, physically inside a data center, being right next to those partners and service providers and being able to physically connect, or virtually adjacent that you can leverage a platform to access those various partners across the ecosystem. And so either way, that ecosystem element is just key in making sure that you can connect to the right places, the right people at the right time.
And for me, it's all about getting data closer to users, right? Edge computing, and there's no way to increase the speed of light, so we have to reduce geographies. So everybody's moving workloads closer to the edge, and everything is getting decentralized. And from a carrier hotel perspective, that's where deploying edge computing, whether it's AWS local zone or content delivery networks closer to their users, cable access points that has local peering instead of backhauling it, as Cole indicated on the last panel. Backhauling those to major peering points, we're seeing a huge growth in tier 2 markets where private peering is growing exponentially to improve the user experience for those users in those central business districts.
And from my aspect, it's really data center to data center interconnect is maximum utilization of fiber and increasing bandwidth. And what we're seeing now is an increase in optical bandwidths from traditionally 100, 200 gig, moving to 400 gig, and in the future to 800 gig, and then extending those distances, getting further reach, not only between data center to data center, but from data center to customer, and also extending those reaches at higher bandwidths.
Excellent.
So I'm kind of on the opposite side here because I'm the buyer looking for data centers, so I can kind of give a different viewpoint. When we look at the network and I'm looking to expand, I'm looking at the core geography that we have and where we can boost performance or increase cost savings. So if we decentralize a market, say Chicago, and we move something to another market around nearby, how much can we actually save, and is there an ROI on that decision to do so? So you couple that with trying to solve for connectivity issues, performance issues, it's opening up a whole new ballgame for these secondary and tertiary markets where we're able to serve customers right where they are as opposed to hauling them back to the major quote-unquote NFL cities.
Right, so in order to make sure you don't trombone, you make sure that that performance is key, companies are assessing, right, the most efficient and effective way. It's no longer a central model. There's more distribution to that network infrastructure, but yet we still need that data gravity, right? So this is a big challenge that folks are trying to solve from a standpoint of what's needed, where is it needed, and how are you doing that? So when it comes to designing networks, particularly between different owner-operated facilities, what challenges are network operators and customers seeing on the network architecture side of things? Is it an issue of interconnectedness between the different operators? Is it a platform enablement solution? Is it a cost, performance, bandwidth? I don't know, Jonathan, you want to start?
That's a really good question. So it's really about a ubiquitous connectivity tissue between carrier hotels and data centers globally. Most hyperscale enterprise customers sit in everybody's data center, whether it's a Neutrality, a Flexential, an Equinix, a CoreSite, a Digital. We're all frenemies. It's all co-opetition. So it's about working with network providers to ensure that there's inter-data center connectivity needs that are SDN enabled, that are cost enabled, and can provide quality of service and disaster avoidance services. And that service is growing quite a bit with Megaport and Packet Fabric, Console Connect. There's lots of SDN fabrics that offer ubiquitous form factor across data centers, and it's elastic bandwidth, on demand, and it works well for our constituents.
And those platforms are great, I understand, for middle mile connectivity, right? That data center to data center connectivity. So how are you helping your customers with edge deployments or deployments into secondary or tertiary markets where there may not be as much of an interconnected fabric existing in those areas? Does anybody want to comment on that?
So I'll jump in there. So we're helping our customers with all of our data centers are interconnected with our backbone, so we can pass traffic across that. But then we've also enabled our cloud fabric, which allows customers from any of our data centers to leverage the portal for instant connectivity to the major CSPs. So they're able to, in our data centers, without to simply spin that up as needed and leverage it across the platform.
Right. And how are content providers looking at these platforms and being able to leverage, right, different ways to reach secondary or tertiary markets?
Yeah, so it depends on what your network architecture is and how your network, whether it be CDN or whatever it may be, runs. But when we evaluate these secondary and tertiary markets, we're looking not just at the colo provider and what they can give us for space and power, because truthfully, anyone can give space and power. That's not the differentiator. The differentiator is, for us, is who can I reach within your facility? Oh, I can't reach XYZ in this facility, but you have interconnection right across the street to this one. Now I can leverage our agreement, our relationship to reach these other eyeballs. Or I can also tell you, hey, I need to reach these carriers. Can you do me a favor and reach out to them and see if they are open to coming to your facility? By opening that conversation, it makes the interconnection a lot easier.
Right.
Instead of trying to solve by throwing fiber in the ground or doing it yourself.
Yeah, and
If I can add a little to this, looking at it from a fiber provider's perspective, I think one of the things I'm conscious of is the NFL cities are still the NFL cities, right? And around the flap ring in Europe, I mean, that's still where the heavy concentration of consumers are. That's where they live. COVID sent them out into the suburbs, but they haven't moved into the wilds of northern Norway quite yet, right? So the truth of the matter is when we think of trying to move out to the edge, I think it is, from a fiber perspective, there's elements of it that are requiring us to be able to keep on expanding to places where there's power, where there's new data center deployments, where there's new CLSs and things like that. But the population hasn't radically moved, right? So it's more in the application distribution down to a number of different layers, right, rather than the fiber.
No, that makes perfect sense. And so, it's also from the standpoint of not all networks are created the same. You've got to understand your routing, right, and the different paths those networks are taking, how it affects performance and latency. But also, right, we can't have choke points because the next iteration of the big bandwidth jump is from 400G to 800G. And that's starting to create a bit of a challenge also, because as we understand, there's a new technology requirement into being able to support optically that shift. Do we want to jump into a little bit of that, what that looks like, and how we may have some challenges to re-architect, right, from the hardware perspective to be able to support such massive scalable bandwidth solutions in the future?
I can discuss some of that, and where we've seen 100 gig migrating to 400 gig, it's been a very natural progression. Equipment form factor is very similar, and outside of supply chain constraints due to the pandemic, equipment's becoming more available, more ports. It's being implemented, it's underway.
Right.
100 gig is still the primary driver in the market today, moving to 400 gig as it's being implemented now. From a data center to data center interconnection, 400G, which is in QSFP DD form factor, is moving into ZR Plus type of coherent technologies, which is driving fiber utilization, bandwidth increments, and extending reach and distances that have not been seen before. Going into 800 gig, I see a paradigm shift. It's almost not a brownfield deployment, it's greenfield deployment in terms of you're going to see equipment forklift, you're going to need to add new equipment that supports 800G, but more importantly, your outside plant for long haul connections or metro connections, even connections to customer, isn't going to support 800 gig natively. So a lot of your MUX, DMUX technology, which are your passives in the field, are going to need to be forklifted and replaced with a different technology to support 800 gig line width. So going forward, greenfield deployments, I see 800G rolling out, but there will have to be investments made both in outside plant and physical inside plant infrastructure.
How does that affect data center operators who are creating interconnection solutions within their, meet me room facilities? Do they too have to then plan for these forklift upgrades in the future?
So I can comment on that a little bit. So what a lot of the cable MSOs are doing is they're trying to avoid those extra capital costs by backhauling those packets and peering and residential eyeballs. For example, instead of taking packets from Kansas City down to Dallas via charter, they're trying to decentralize all that private peering in Kansas City and keeping all that traffic local, keeping it off their network which will reduce their costs and obviously improve the customer experience in that central business district. So we're seeing a lot of repatriation of peering out of the NFL cities into tier 2 cities, at least in my world. And that goes along with CSPs, cloud service providers are getting their local zones closer to the users, as well as the content delivery networks like Brad's StackPath company is trying to get his compute closer to the users. So that's what I see.
So from your comment earlier in regards to private peering capabilities, this is one way that companies are being able to manage the routing for efficiency by creating private peering handoffs in local markets. Is that
That's right.
correct?
Everybody wins. It's a better customer experience. The cable operator or the network provider saves money on transport costs, and the end customer saves money on their bill. So it's a trifecta.
Right. Does anybody else want to comment about what's happening from inside the centers, being able to prepare, right, for this onslaught of data expected to be used by some of the even newer technology companies like AI?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is, back in, not that long ago, customers were buying 1 gig ports. And we've seen a very specific shift that people aren't buying the 1 gig ports. We're starting at 10 gig. But then the challenge with the upgrades to the larger bandwidths is the infrastructure in place. And people, it's hard to get to, they're expensive, there's lead times. And so we're leveraging capabilities to be able to enable our customers to get up to 40 gig, which is just a stair step on that journey to 400 gig or 800 gig, allowing them to get there without having to upgrade their infrastructure. So finding that in-between solution. And the interesting thing that we're seeing is as customers are upgrading to the larger pipes, the utilization hasn't necessarily skyrocketed in parallel. So we're definitely seeing that architect for the future versus architect for today, and making sure that we've got the right bandwidth capabilities available for when we need to burst or when we need to grow. So that's really what we're seeing.
Right, and just for everybody, right, we're talking about, right, like the big chasms here, right? Not every customer is going to immediately want to turn on that switch and go from 400 to 800, but it's that 1 or 2 customer at that edge of the business that you have to figure out how to plan for, because ultimately everyone is going to get there. And so we're hearing that there's been a big shift, right? 10G is the new 1G. 100 now is like the new average, right? And so that over time is going to happen. So you have to plan for, the edges of use in your customers on your network. And, it also has another big, challenge, because are we innovating too fast? Are we innovating fast enough? Are we, as companies, having our own technology deficits that we are falling too far behind in our own ability to keep up pace with some of the more adoptive and innovative and fast-paced moving companies? So how are you protecting your own business assets in this shift as we continue to drive demand for bigger, faster, cheaper, stronger, et cetera? So Andrew.
Sure, I'll take that. It's a really interesting question. When I think about how to make telcos more efficient, I think start with killing the admin. The average member of staff spends maybe 5–10% of their time, if you're lucky, actually touching the network. They spend 90% of their time filling in systems, moving data around within the organization, saying, Bob, can you do this? Jerry, can you do that? Right. All that sort of stuff. So I think there's an awful lot for us to do in terms of making the industry efficient in the way we work, rather than necessarily in the technology layer. When we look at the returns on capital, well, I think the thing that terrifies me the most is when you have to overbuild line systems entirely, starting to do, amplifier upgrades, anything that's going to have massive amounts of planned works impacts on your customers. But as long as we're talking about just adding incremental transponder technologies within a spectrum plane that actually works, then I think it's less problematic, is my personal view, but maybe I've been lucky. It gets more complicated as you get into different layers, right?
Right. Jerry, did you want to comment on that?
No, he's hitting right on spot. So it's, dealing with customer outages, planning upgrades, future-proofing your network all goes hand in hand. And there's right ways to do it and wrong ways to do it. And I think deploying the right equipment, taking future technology, making sure that your outside plant matches your inside plant is critical to eliminating or minimizing customer outages. They're inevitable at some point when you make a major transition, but it's really about managing for the future, deploying what's correct now with the future in mind, and making sure that you have inside and outside plant matched correctly. If you go outside those bounds, I'm sure that you will maximize customer outages and have to deal with, technology later, further down the line.
Right, well, that makes sense. And does that also change whether it's a core market or an edge market?
It won't make a difference either or. You're still inside as well as outside. Whether you're dealing with the edge or the core, it's still the same principle.
And for companies that are building out to the edge, do they need to be building out with as much bandwidth as the core? Or is there a smaller tributary? And I see Brad kind of smirking a little bit because I guarantee a touch on the pain point.
Yeah.
Which is, you have to build out edge markets substantially, right?
Yeah, so when you're building out the sites, how are you going to be supporting it? What do you expect for traffic growth? Talking about 800 gig optics from my side of things on the content side, that's a huge single point of failure. Losing 800 gigs of capacity to a peer because one fiber strand goes down, that hurts. So that means you're going to have to bid more into your DR plans to make sure that you have redundancies in place. We're hitting that same point that we did with 100 gig, 8 years ago, where you have to do the cost analysis. Okay, I have 7 by 100. If I go to 8 by 100, does it equal the cost savings to go to the 800 gig optic? Yes or no? Ultimately, we're not there yet. The ROI is not there, and it's kind of funny to me from the content side to hear data centers talking about enabling 800 gig optics and helping their customers succeed, because that takes away a revenue line. For every 7 by 100 cross connects you have, you're down to 1 by cross connect. That's revenue. What's going to happen is when we make this transition to 800, we're going to see cross connect pricing going up for everybody else because there's a drop in revenue, which is kind of not cool when you think about it. Like, we're expanding technology, but because of it, you're going to have an increased cost on the back end for a sunk cost item. So that's kind of how I see it on my side.
Right. And so so what are the different capacity shifts that you're seeing then, right? As a CDN operator, are you seeing, some challenges in those edge markets that you're looking to deploy in because the capacity shifts in the way that you're designing your network now require more at the edge?
Yeah, so that's been kind of interesting that you say that. So in some of the markets we've expanded into in a different country more than us. So again, secondary, tertiary markets, some of the ISPs only can support 1 gig or 10 gig ports. So how can you future plan for that when you're hamstring to the local local ISP who can only do a 10 gig port? So you always have to have backwards compatibility built into your plan, but then how do you plan for future growth with that network as well as to the next data center?
Right.
So it's a lot that's making it difficult because it is new technology.
Yeah, the new technology, we don't know how it all works. Not everyone's going to be deploying it. It's going to be super lumpy. And you're going to have even more of a chasm of experts because of that lumpiness. So it's going to be interesting to watch. As we start to round up here, I want to make sure I open up questions to the audience. I do have a hot topic round, but I want to make sure that any questions that you have for our panelists are addressed. Do we have any questions from the audience at this point? All right, great. Well, we are covering it all. So let's then talk about application design. We did not talk about cloud. We did not talk about how that's affecting, right, this east-west, traffic divide. So what are you seeing from a demand standpoint for the cloud, for capacity needs, and for network interconnection, right, as a result? So why don't we start, right, with you, Sherry?
Yeah, so we're seeing, historically it was how do I talk to in my environment? Now, as customers are shifting, or enterprises are shifting from cloud first, really shifting to cloud smart. So it's what workloads fit the right infrastructure, and now how do I make these various workloads talk to each other. So it's a whole nother element, not just how do I talk to my workload altogether, but how do my workloads talk to each other? So really adding some complexities there on the communication between, and that making it easy to spin up hey, I've got a new vendor, a new workload, how do I integrate this into my overall architecture is what we're seeing.
I'd say I've experienced personally, in IT systems, right, when your application design decisions can have profound overnight impacts on your AWS bill, right? And that is something that I think is, an instability in the economics of all this that didn't used to exist. That is definitely a little bit of a challenge for clients, right?
What about the cloud at neutrality?
Yes, I love the cloud. So from my experience, cloud consumption continues to increase in tier 2 markets. The CSPs are rolling out 100G DX nodes in Kansas City, Philadelphia, for example, to bypass filigree and Stemmons. That's a huge trend. And then also bringing that cloud resource to the edge data center, like in an outpost design, where you can protect data sovereignty or work on sensitive gaming applications that don't do well with jitter and getting backhauled to tier 1 carrier hotels. So that's been a big trend that we've seen accelerate in our markets.
Who do you think is going to be the big change agent driving bandwidth hardware upgrades for data center operators? Is it going to be the cloud providers, the content providers, a mix of both? Who's going to be the first one to really upset how that is all going to be required for future deployments? Want to take a stab at it?
I would say it's going to be NVIDIA. AI, DGX-enabled data centers is going to be the bane of our existence and also the acceleration of our growth. It's going to be very dense. Everything's going to be 60 amp 3-phase. Everything's going to be 20 to 70 kilowatts from a density perspective, and it's going to cause operators the ability to provide hot aisle, cold aisle containment, liquid cooling, other technologies, and then you have to throw in the sustainability, ESG discussions. So that's my personal opinion.
That's interesting. Anybody else have a comment on that? Want to hedge? Nope, no hedging on that one. All right. Well, I'm going to do some hot topic rounds with us. These are fun, and these are true, false questions. And we could have discussions about these. Data center real estate. Will cross-connect fees go up while real estate costs go down? True or false? You want to start with that, Andrew?
It's an awful question. I suspect it's true. God, I wish it was false. Anyway.
I was going to go false.
I'm going to agree with my panelists, false.
I would have to think it would be true.
100% true. I have zero doubts that it will not, that they will stay the same.
So our panelists are almost 50% split on the fact that data center real estate is probably going to go down in costs while cross-connect fees go up. So we'll have to see what happens in the marketplace with that. All right, so we talked a little bit about this on our panel. Will AI and machine learning explode data usage beyond our current understanding? True or false? Andrew?
I would say true.
I'd say absolutely.
100%.
I've been around a long time and I've seen a lot of, in vogue, ideas. I believe it when I see it, but I do think AI is going to drive the market and data usage. It's not there yet, but again, I want to see it to believe it.
I'm on the wait and see. Right now, I think it's too early to say, because by the time we get to that point of scale, what technology is going to be in place that we won't need so much to support it. So it's kind of hard to say yes or no.
Hard to say. 15 years ago, we had barely talked about what the cloud is, right? Here we are 15 years later, and we are now trying to figure out how to optimize the direction of traffic flow. east and west to accommodate cloud users and the abundance there. They're already starting to repatriate from the cloud, implementing, a cloud smart strategies, as Sherry put it. So it's really hard to say how things are going to change, but I'm going to bet that the companies that are leading the data transformation today may not be the same companies leading data transformation tomorrow. I think that's a safe bet. All right, so here's another one about data center design. True or false? Tier 3 or higher facility design will be the norm in the future.
I am the least qualified person to answer this question, but I'm going to put forward a hypothesis, and it's why I think the value of data center real estate may decline. Because I think in the end, you need to move the security, the way that you think of it all, into the application, and the infrastructure needs to be ubiquitous, not necessarily highly well utilized, but spread out around. And that's why I would say it probably gets cheaper and dirtier in a way. Hopefully not green dirtier, it should be greener, but.
Yeah, I was going to go false. It's shifting to more distributed redundancy instead of the redundancy within the data center itself.
I'm going to say true. The data center is the epicenter of everything we do, right? All of our applications reside in the data center. The cloud's a data center. It's not some cloud, right? So it's all about mitigating SPOF, single points of failure. So Tier 3 equivalent standards mitigates that for every single operator and constituent we have, and it allows customers to and consumers to have access to their data.
Yeah, I'm definitely not qualified to answer that one, but I think I lean toward what Jonathan is echoing. It is the epicenter, and it drives a lot of data, a lot of bandwidth, but I would tend to lean in your direction.
Yeah, I'm going to go with true on that one as well. Eventually, we're going to get to the point, because how long were we that only tier 1s was the standard? That's it. Nobody did secondary, tertiary markets. It was tier 1 data center, that's all you do. And now people are realizing that, wait a minute, if I actually look at this differently, I can get more optimization out of my network. I can save cost and give a boost to performance while expanding. It's going to be the norm.
Right, that's interesting. I didn't think of it from that perspective, so thank you. All right, so edge markets. We need multiple providers, locations, and a lot of bandwidth in edge markets. We need an abundance of it. True or false? We'll start with Brad.
50-50 on that one. So I don't know if we need multiple data centers in multiple secondary and tertiary markets. It ends up creating an issue where at what point does a provider choose not to go with that? The ISP is going to go with who they have, so now you've just lost some of your content customers who need to reach the eyeballs. So I think it's going to be a 50-50 split. Nice.
Okay.
I'm leaning more toward true on that one, and what we're seeing in the cable MSO space is a lot more bandwidth requirement, upgrading of networks at the edge, moving from 1, 2, 4 to 10 gig, with drivers going forward to 25 gig at the edge. Once equipment and upgrades take place to support that, especially in the DOCSIS world, we're really starting to see more and more needs at the edge. So I'm going to say, going forward, you're going to see in general a demand for bandwidth grow.
I'm going to say true as well, especially with the advent of all the infrastructure funds and the BEAD money that's been approved by Congress from last year. So we're trying to serve rural America with high-speed internet, with unlicensed and licensed wireless providers, and all that bandwidth needs to peer in a local central business district to keep their costs down and to improve the performance of those users in those rural communities. So that market's going to explode.
Yeah, I agree. The market's going to explode, and as workloads need to get closer and closer to the users and the eyeballs, there's going to be different providers that are going to have various sweet spots in that progression.
I generally agree with everything the panel said. I think the slight different perspective I would take at it is, to me, it's not about how does that grow, it's about its relative growth versus the core, right? So if I look at the amount of core versus edge traffic in, let's say, tier 1 IP networks, which I've spent a lot of time in over years, it's taken a very long time. Like, the traffic has gotten much edgier, much more traffic settles in local boxes now than it used to, but it's probably 10-15% movement over a decade. So while the edge will grow and the edge will explode, is it going to become all of a sudden massively more important than the core? No, it's a tilting, I think.
I do think that we need multiple players in each edge market because you need redundancy, diversity, all of that, but you also need to make sure that all that network infrastructure is redundant and diverse and has different pathways. I liken it to the fast food model. Right? How many markets that have a McDonald's, right? You're going to find another fast food like right down the road, right? Whether it's Burger King or Wendy's or whatnot. It's the same idea with these edge markets. All right, our last question, true or false? And this has to do with network design, top down versus bottom up. Designing digital infrastructure requires a top-down approach. You got to think of your applications and then design all the way down to the bottom of what that's needed. Is that true or false? And we'll start with you, Andrew.
I think when well done, it's true.
Yeah, I'd go true. I think everything you got to start big picture and block and tackle with how you're going to execute on it.
I'm kind of conflicted on this one. I think you need to have everything in order, but you also have to listen to your constituents, listen to your users. So you need to poll your user base and listen to your users.
I'm leaning with John on that one. I would say you need to be in the middle, and you need to know the users as well as the high-level applications and design from within, meaning the end user and the top level is a match, and as well as planning for that future and ensuring, again, that the design matches the end user.
All right, bring us home, Brad.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's already kind of touched on it all, so I would say true as well. I mean, in the one sense of look at it is, if you expand into a new market, you've already done the research. Is it still a top-down if you already have the same standard across it? Or if you're cookie cutting it, it's the same design everywhere you go. Is it really a top-down design, or is it just pulling a t-shirt out of the box and throwing it in? So it's kind of a 50-50 design plan.
Way to find the non-true or false response in that answer, Brad. Well done. You panelists are fantastic. We are right at time. Thank you so much, audience, for listening. Appreciate it. Thank you, guys. Well done.
Thank you, everyone. We have a short break now, and we'll be kicking off our messaging content at 1 p.m. So thank you all for joining us. I look forward to seeing you later. Oh, sure.
Was this recorded in any way?
Yes. So we've got the camera at the back. I'm going to step away from the mic.
Access to it after the show.